A beggar girl reveals a secret at the millionaire's son's wake, but comment giving a score from 0 to 10 to my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The heavy silence of the funeral home's grand hall was shattered by the sound of bare feet running across the polished marble. The 4-year-old beggar girl, who looked like she was only 2 due to her extreme fragility, burst through the wreaths of white flowers, her unkempt hair flying. Her ragged clothes contrasted brutally with the elegance of the room, where men in suits and women in black dresses whispered condolences. The 30-year-old businessman, known for his Hollywood good looks and fortune built in the real estate sector of the big city, was bent over the small mahogany coffin. His hands trembled as he held a white rose, his eyes red from crying over the premature departure of his only son. Beside him, his 40-year-old sister-in-law watched with a calculating expression, already envisioning the assets that could be redistributed after this family tragedy. The frail child crossed the central aisle without hesitating, ignoring the scandalized looks of the mourners. Her small, dirty feet left marks on the pristine floor as she walked directly to the open casket. The widowed millionaire looked up when he felt a presence approaching, and his eyes met the tiny figure standing before his son's body. "He's not really gone," the girl declared in her childish voice, but loaded with a certainty that made the whole room freeze. "He's still in here." The businessman straightened up abruptly, his face, previously marked by grief, now contorted with indignation. How dare this intruder desecrate the most sacred moment of his life? His fortune in stocks and investments had provided him with everything except the ability to save his own son. And now a beggar appeared to mock his tragedy. "Get that child out of here," he ordered in a hoarse voice. But before anyone could move, the girl extended her small, dirty hand and gently touched the cold fingers of the boy in the coffin. The family doctor, an arrogant man dressed in his most expensive suit, approached with long strides. "Sir, I performed all the necessary tests. I can assure you that there is no possibility of—" His words died in his throat when the 4-year-old boy's eyes slowly opened, blinking against the soft light of the hall. A muffled scream echoed among those present. Some women put their hands to their chests, others clung to their husbands for support. The businessman staggered back, his face paling as he processed the impossible. His net worth in dollars had grown through decades of hard work, but he had never witnessed anything that so challenged his understanding of reality. "Daddy?" murmured the boy in a weak voice, trying to focus his gaze on the face of his father, who was watching him with a mixture of joy and terror. The beggar girl smiled shyly and took a few steps back, as if her mission was accomplished. "My grandma taught me that sometimes people are sleeping too deeply, but it's not their time to go yet," she explained, with the simplicity typical of a child. "I felt like he was just sleeping." The doctor approached the coffin with trembling hands, checking the pulse of the boy, who was now trying to sit up. His reputation, built over decades, seemed to crumble before this inexplicable situation. How had all his equipment and knowledge failed so spectacularly? The businessman knelt beside the coffin, carefully picking up his son in his arms, as if afraid he might disappear again. Tears of relief mixed with confusion streamed down his face as he hugged the child he had mourned for 3 consecutive days. "How did you know?" he asked the beggar girl, his voice breaking with emotion. "How could a child like you know something that doctors didn't?" The girl shrugged, nervously playing with the frayed threads of her torn t-shirt. "I always feel things differently than people, when they are really sad or when they are just sleeping too deeply. But I never said anything before because people get angry with me." The ambitious sister-in-law watched the scene with growing alarm. Her carefully laid plans to take control of the family business were collapsing before her eyes. The fortune she had envisioned redistributing among investments and applications would now remain untouched in the hands of a nephew who should have been gone forever. The funeral home transformed into a murmur of whispered voices. Some guests made the sign of the cross, others questioned whether they had witnessed a miracle or an elaborate hoax. The businessman, however, could only think of the small, frail figure who had put his world back on track. "What's your name?" he asked softly, still holding the son who was now smiling weakly. "People call me lots of names on the street," the girl replied, lowering her eyes. "But my grandma called me her little angel." The millionaire felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had not experienced since he lost his wife 2 years earlier. His life had been reduced to accumulating wealth and possessions, building a financial empire that now seemed insignificant in the face of the actions of that abandoned child. "Where do you live?" he continued, observing the clothes unsuitable for the cold weather of the city. The girl pointed vaguely in the direction of the street. "Out there. There are some places under the bridges where the wind doesn't blow so much." The businessman closed his eyes for a moment, processing the information. A 4-year-old child, alone in the freezing streets, had saved his son when all his fortune and contacts had failed. The irony of the situation was almost unbearable. "Do you have family? Someone who takes care of you?" he insisted. "No, not anymore. My grandma's gone a long time, and after her, no one stayed with me." The silence that followed was broken only by the low murmur of the guests who were trying to understand what they had witnessed. The doctor continued to examine the boy, shaking his head in complete disbelief. His state-of-the-art equipment, bought with the profit of years of private consultations, had failed completely. The sister-in-law approached with calculated steps, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Honey, maybe we should thank the girl and send her back to wherever she lives. This is not a place for—" "No," the businessman interrupted with surprising firmness. "She saved my son. She's not going back to the streets." The statement echoed through the room like a sentence. The beggar girl raised her big, scared eyes as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her life experience had taught her that rich people were generous only when it suited them, and that children like her were disposable. The businessman stood up, still carrying his son, who was now breathing normally. His mind, trained to make quick decisions in business involving millions, had reached a conclusion that would change everything. That child was not just a beggar who had appeared by chance. She was something else, something he needed to understand. "You're coming home with us," he announced, ignoring the panicked look that his sister-in-law gave him, "at least until we understand how you knew about my son." The beggar girl took a step back, her survival instincts activated. Promises from wealthy adults often came with traps and deceptions, but there was something in that man's eyes, a sincerity born of despair and gratitude, that made her hesitate to run. The future of everyone present in that room was about to change in ways that none of them could have imagined. The businessman's mansion stood majestically in the city's most upscale neighborhood, its pristine gardens contrasting sharply with the reality where the beggar girl had lived for the past 2 years. As the luxury car stopped in front of the ornate gates, she pressed her small face against the window, watching with wide eyes the grandeur that stretched out before her. "Is that really a house?" she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. The businessman, who was carrying his still weak son in his arms, noticed the expression of utter astonishment on the child's face. His fortune had provided him with that residence 5 years ago, when his investments in real estate funds finally began to yield the expected dividends. But he had never thought about how that opulence might look to someone who slept under bridges. The ambitious sister-in-law followed in tense silence, her fingers drumming nervously against her designer purse. The presence of that intruder in her future inheritance represented a threat she needed to neutralize quickly. Her plans to take control of the family assets could not be compromised by a dirty beggar and her supposed mystical abilities. As they crossed the entrance hall, with its imported crystal chandelier and Italian marble floor, the girl instinctively held onto the hem of her torn t-shirt. Each step echoed in the spacious environment, making her feel even smaller and more out of place. The housekeepers, formally lined up to receive their boss, observed the child with expressions that varied between curiosity and poorly disguised disdain. "Mrs. Margaret?" The businessman addressed the head housekeeper, a 50-year-old woman with a rigid posture and an impeccable uniform. "Prepare the guest room on the second floor. Our young guest will be staying with us for a while." The housekeeper narrowed her eyes as she examined the dirty child before her. "Sir, perhaps it would be more appropriate for her to stay in the staff quarters. The guest room is reserved for—" "She's staying in the guest room," he interrupted firmly. "And provide appropriate clothing, hot food, and a bath immediately." The discomfort among the employees was palpable. Decades of serving wealthy families had taught them the rigid social hierarchy that governed that world. A beggar occupying noble rooms violated all the unwritten rules of their reality. As he climbed the hardwood staircase, carrying his son who could now walk with help, the businessman watched the girl following a few steps behind. Her thin legs trembled with fatigue and malnutrition, but her eyes remained alert, capturing every detail of the luxurious environment. "How old are you exactly?" he asked when they reached the second floor. "4," she replied, stopping to catch her breath. "I think 4. My grandma counted on her fingers with me." The information hit the businessman like a punch. His own child was the same age, but the difference in their physical condition was shocking. While his son had grown up surrounded by expensive medical care and a balanced diet, that girl had survived on leftovers found in the trash. The guest room was decorated in soft shades of blue and white, with light wood furniture and a king-size bed that could accommodate an entire family. The girl stopped at the doorway, hesitating to enter. The contrast between that environment and the dark corners where she slept was so extreme that it seemed unreal. "You can come in," encouraged the businessman. "This is your room now." "Mine?" she repeated, incredulous. "Just mine?" He nodded, watching as she took cautious steps across the plush carpet. Each movement revealed her distrustful nature, shaped by months of survival on the streets where generosity often hid traps. The housekeeper appeared at the door with an expression of barely contained disapproval. "Sir, I need to inform you about the implications of having a street child. In the house, there are issues of security, hygiene, and—" "Margaret," the businessman's voice carried a tone of warning. "This girl saved my son. She will be treated with the respect she deserves." After leaving the child with instructions to take a bath and eat, the businessman went to his private office. The room was his personal sanctuary, decorated with photographs of his business successes and graphs showing the exponential growth of his net worth in stocks over the years. Sitting in his leather armchair, he tried to process the extraordinary events of the day. His analytical mind, trained to assess risks and opportunities in millionaire businesses, struggled to find rational explanations for what he had witnessed. How could an abandoned child know something that trained doctors could not detect? The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his personal lawyer, a man who managed his most important contracts and knew his financial situation intimately. "I heard about what happened at the funeral home," said the voice on the other end of the line. "People are talking. Are you sure you want to get involved with this child? There are complex legal implications in cases of informal adoption." "I'm not adopting anyone," he replied quickly. "She's here temporarily until I understand how she knew about my son. Be careful not to get carried away by emotion. Your fortune attracts all kinds of opportunists, and children can be used as very effective tools." After hanging up, the businessman stared out the window of his office. Down below, in the perfectly maintained gardens, he could see the heated pool where his son used to play before the incident that almost took him away. All that luxury, bought with years of hard work and calculated investments, had become irrelevant in the face of the simple actions of an unknown child. Meanwhile, upstairs, the girl was experiencing completely new sensations. The hot water of the shower was a luxury she had forgotten since the departure of her grandmother. The scented soap and soft towels contrasted brutally with the icy baths in public fountains and drying in the cold wind. The housekeeper had left children's clothes on the bed, simple but clean dresses that seemed to have belonged to the businessman's son when he was younger. As she dressed, the girl looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the clean child who stared back at her. The food served in her room was another sensory shock. Hot soup, fresh bread, and colorful fruits occupied a silver tray worth more than anything she had owned in her life. Every bite was savored slowly, as if it could disappear at any moment. During the night, as she snuggled between clean sheets for the first time in 2 years, the girl could hear muffled conversations coming from downstairs. The ambitious sister-in-law was arguing vehemently with the businessman about her presence in the house. "You don't know anything about that child," said the female voice, full of irritation. "How can you bring a stranger into the house, especially after what your son went through?" "She saved him, precisely," replied the businessman. "If it weren't for her, I would have buried my only son today." "What if it's some kind of elaborate scam? These street people are very cunning. Maybe she somehow knew about the boy's condition, and how could a 4-year-old orchestrate something like that?" The girl shrank under the covers, recognizing the tone of distrust that she had learned to fear. She knew that her presence in that house was fragile, dependent on the goodwill of a man who barely knew her, and the tolerance of people who clearly saw her as an intruder. In the days that followed, the dynamic of the mansion changed drastically. The employees treated her with a mixture of curiosity and barely disguised resistance. Whispered comments about invaders and freeloaders echoed through the hallways when they thought she wasn't listening. The businessman's son, still recovering from his near-death experience, developed an immediate connection with his savior. They spent hours playing together in the gardens, where she drew birds in the dirt, while he built sandcastles in the sandbox, especially imported for his activities. "Why did you know I wasn't dead?" he asked during one of those games, with the frankness typical of children. The girl paused in her drawing, considering the question seriously. "I felt like you were still in there, just very far away. Like when we sleep and dream, but can't wake up right. Do you feel other things from people?" She nodded shyly. "Sometimes I feel when they are very sad inside, even when they are smiling outside, or when they are afraid of something." The businessman, who was watching the conversation from afar, felt a growing mixture of fascination and unease. How to scientifically explain what he had witnessed? His fortune had been built on precise analyses and decisions based on concrete data, but that child defied everything he believed in. As the weeks passed, small incidents confirmed the girl's unusual abilities. She predicted when the gardener would cut his finger with the pruning shears, alerting him seconds before the accident. She also knew when the cook was particularly sad, offering her drawings of flowers that made the woman cry with emotion. The ambitious sister-in-law watched these events with growing alarm. Each demonstration of the child's abilities solidified her position in the house and threatened the carefully laid plans to take control of the family assets. She needed to act before the situation got completely out of her control. It was then that she decided to begin her subtle campaign of discrediting, planting seeds of doubt about the girl's true intentions, and questioning whether her presence did not pose a danger to the entire family. 3 months had passed since the girl's arrival at the mansion, and the ambitious sister-in-law had perfected her strategy of psychological sabotage. During family dinners, she made seemingly innocent comments that planted seeds of distrust in the businessman's mind. "It's strange how accidents have started happening more often since she arrived," she murmured as she delicately cut her steak. "Yesterday the driver almost crashed the car. Last week the maid broke the expensive china. Maybe it's a coincidence." The businessman frowned, his analytical mind beginning to catalogue the incidents mentioned. His fortune had been built by identifying patterns and connections, and his sister-in-law's insinuations echoed thoughts he preferred to ignore. The girl, sitting across the table in a high chair specially adjusted, perceived the growing tension but did not fully understand its origin. Her big eyes watched the adults with the keen intuition that had kept her alive on the streets, detecting waves of hostility that she could not explain. During these weeks, she had manifested her gift on several occasions that left everyone disconcerted. One morning, she prevented the businessman's son from climbing the tree in the garden, insisting that something bad would happen. 2 hours later, a heavy branch broke off exactly from the spot where the boy would have been playing. "How did you know?" the businessman had asked, watching the wreckage on the ground. "I felt like the tree was very tired," she had replied simply. Sometimes plants get sick inside, just like people. These demonstrations, which should generate gratitude, began to be interpreted in a new light due to the constant insinuations of the sister-in-law. What if the child was somehow causing the problem she then solved? What if her presence brought a disturbing energy to the house? The businessman struggled internally with these doubts. His rational education rejected supernatural concepts, but the events he had witnessed defied any logical explanation. His investments in stocks and his fortune in euros had grown through precise analyses, not superstitions. How could he accept that a child possessed abilities that science could not explain? One particularly tense night, while checking financial reports in his office, he discovered something disturbing. Old photographs of his late wife, which he kept locked in a special drawer, had been rearranged. Someone had been messing with his most sacred belongings. His first impulse was to blame the girl. Who else would have enough curiosity to rummage through his personal items? The initial anger, however, was tempered by the memory of how she had saved his son. Would she be capable of such a violation after receiving so much care? The next morning, he confronted the child gently. "Did you go into my office last night?" She shook her head vigorously. "No, sir. Grandma always said we shouldn't touch other people's things without permission." There was sincerity in her big eyes, but the sister-in-law, who was watching the conversation from afar, planted another poisonous seed. Children lie easily when they feel threatened. It's a natural defense mechanism. The situation became complicated when objects began to disappear mysteriously from the mansion. First it was a gold watch, a family heirloom that sat on the fireplace mantel. Then small jewels that the housekeeper swore she had left in their usual places. Each disappearance was followed by suspicious glances directed at the only new person in the house. The girl felt the growing weight of distrust like a dark cloud hovering over her head. The employees, who already treated her coldly, became openly hostile. Mean comments echoed through the hallways. It was to be expected. Street people don't change. Once a thief, always a thief. The businessman watched these changes with growing discomfort. His controlling nature demanded logical explanations, but the events in his house seemed to follow a logic of their own that escaped his understanding. His millionaire profits in cryptocurrencies had been earned through calculated strategies, not decisions based on emotions or intuitions. It was during a particularly violent storm that everything changed dramatically. The businessman's son was playing in the attic when lightning struck the mansion's lightning rod, causing an electrical overload that ignited part of the old wiring. The boy was trapped upstairs while smoke began to spread through the environment. The girl, who was in the garden watching the rain through the living room window, suddenly stood up with an expression of panic. "He's in danger!" she shouted, running towards the staircase. "The fire will get to him!" The adults took a few precious seconds to process her words. When they finally understood, the child had already climbed 2 flights of stairs with a speed impossible for her small, malnourished legs. The businessman followed her, his heart racing with terror for the safety of both children. In the attic, They found the girl holding firmly the hand of the frightened boy, guiding him away from the area where sparks were beginning to lick the old wooden beams. Her reflexes had been perfect, anticipating the danger in seconds that saved a life. "How did you know he was here?" asked the businessman breathlessly, carrying both children down the stairs while the firefighters arrived to control the fire. "I felt like he was very scared," she replied, trembling. "And I smelled smoke before I saw it." That second salvation should have ended any doubts about her intentions, but the ambitious sister-in-law quickly reinterpreted the events. "Isn't it strange how she's always around when your son gets into trouble? Almost as if she knew something was going to happen because she helped cause it." The suggestion was poisonous and effective. The businessman, already shaken by the missing objects and the tense atmosphere in the house, began to question whether the girl's presence had really brought protection or danger. His mind, accustomed to assessing risks in high-value investments, identified suspicious patterns where perhaps only coincidences existed. During the following weeks, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The girl perceived the change in the atmosphere of the house as a physical pressure on her chest. The man who had saved her from the streets now watched her with distrustful eyes. The meals became silent and tense. Even the boy, her only true ally, seemed confused by the conflicts of loyalty he perceived in the adults. One night, while trying to sleep in her luxurious room that no longer felt like a refuge, the girl heard conversations coming from the businessman's office. His sister-in-law was presenting what she called conclusive evidence about the disturbing nature of the child. "I found this in her room," said the female voice triumphantly. "The gold watch that disappeared last week." The girl's heart sank. She knew that she had never touched that watch, had never even entered the office without permission. But she also knew that the words of a beggar child would have little weight against the accusations of a respected woman of society. "That doesn't prove anything definitive," replied the businessman, but his voice carried a doubt that he could no longer hide. "It proves that she is exactly what she always was. A street thief who found a vulnerable family to exploit. You need to get rid of her before she causes more damage." The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. The girl shrank under the covers, feeling the safe world she had known for 3 months crumbling around her. The feeling of abandonment that she thought she had left behind returned with multiplied force. The next morning, the businessman called her for a conversation in his office. His words were carefully chosen, but the meaning was clear. Her stay in the house was being questioned. There had arisen complications that needed to be resolved. The girl listened to everything in silence, her big eyes filling with tears that she refused to shed. She had survived 2 years on the streets, developing an emotional resilience that she now needed to recover. If that family no longer wanted her, she would find a way to survive again. What she did not know was that the businessman's son had witnessed all the manipulation of his ambitious aunt. The boy, with the brutal honesty of children, was about to reveal secrets that would change everything once again. The businessman's son burst into the office like a hurricane of childish indignation, his cheeks red from running down the hallway. "Dad, Aunt's lying," he shouted in a high-pitched voice full of urgency. "I saw her putting the watch in the girl's room." The silence that settled in the room was so heavy that it seemed to suck the air from the room. The businessman, who was sitting behind his mahogany desk contemplating transfer documents to an orphanage, looked up slowly. The ambitious sister-in-law, who had just presented her final evidence against the child, paled visibly. "What did you say?" asked the businessman, his voice controlled but laden with a dangerous tension. The boy approached the desk, his words coming out in spurts interspersed with emotion. "Last night, when you left for that business meeting, I saw Aunt taking the watch from the office. I thought she was going to put it in a safe place, but then she went up to the girl's room." The sister-in-law tried to interrupt with a forced laugh. "Honey, children have very fertile imaginations. Sometimes they confuse dreams with, "I wasn't dreaming," insisted the boy, his tears of frustration beginning to flow. "And there's more. I heard her talking on the phone about how she was going to get rid of the intruder, and that then you would see the reason about the family business." The child's words fell like bombs in the tense environment. The businessman stood up slowly, his mind processing the devastating implications of what he had just heard. His fortune in assets and investments had been built through decades of trust in people close to him, and discovering that that trust had been betrayed so calculatingly made him nauseous. "This is nonsense," protested the sister-in-law, but her voice trembled slightly. "Are you going to believe the fantasies of a child instead of—" "Shut up," ordered the businessman with a coldness that made everyone in the room recoil. His transformation was instantaneous. The gentle and confused man turned into the ruthless tycoon who had built a business empire. "Explain to me exactly how you knew where to find the watch in her room." The trap of her own words closed on the sister-in-law. She had boasted of finding the evidence, but now she realized that such knowledge would only be possible if she herself had placed the object there. Her desperate eyes searched for a way out, but found none. Meanwhile, the girl remained at the doorway, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of hope and terror. Her experiences on the streets had taught her that the truth did not always prevail, especially when poor children faced powerful adults. The businessman walked to the built-in safe in the wall, entering the combination with precise movements. From inside, he removed a folder containing documents that he had never shown to anyone. "Since we're talking about truths," he said in a controlled voice, "maybe it's time you knew what really happened to the inheritance you covet so much." The revelation that followed completely destroyed the ambitious sister-in-law's plans. The businessman explained that months before his son's near tragedy, he had discovered serious irregularities in her management of the family business. Diversion of funds, fraudulent contracts, fictitious investments that existed only on paper. "I was preparing her dismissal and criminal charges when I almost lost him," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "After that, nothing seemed important anymore. But now, seeing how you tried to destroy an innocent child to protect your schemes," the sister-in-law attempted one last desperate defense. "You can't prove anything. They're just suspicions and—" "I have recordings," he interrupted coldly. "Phone conversations, altered documents, everything. My lawyers have been preparing the case for months." The woman collapsed into a chair, realizing that her carefully constructed life was crumbling. Her dreams of controlling the family fortune, of living surrounded by the luxury she considered her right, evaporated before her eyes. The businessman knelt down to his son's height, hugging him tightly. "Thank you for having the courage to tell me the truth," he whispered. "You saved our family." Then he turned to the girl, who still remained hesitant at the door. "And you," he said softly, "forgive me for doubting. You saved my son twice, and I almost allowed you to be kicked out of the house because of lies." The child approached timidly, her eyes still cautious. "Can I stay?" "Really? If you want," he replied, extending his hand. "But first, I need to tell you a story about your grandmother." What was revealed in the following hours changed everything definitively. The businessman had kept for decades a yellowed letter, written by a nurse from the maternity ward where he was born. The woman described how she had saved a premature baby during complications in childbirth, a boy that doctors had given up for lost. "Her name was the same as your grandmother's," he explained in an emotional voice. "And the description she made in the letter, you have the same eyes, the same way of tilting your head when you're thinking." The connection was not of blood, but of purpose. The girl's grandmother had saved the businessman's life at the moment of his birth, and now her granddaughter had saved the life of his son, a cycle of protection that transcended coincidences or chance. "My grandma always said that some people are born to take care of others," murmured the girl, delicately touching the old letter. She said that our gift came from very far away, from people who were healers and midwives a long time ago. The ambitious sister-in-law was escorted out of the mansion that same day, facing not only the loss of her privileged position, but also criminal charges for the financial crimes she had committed. The prejudiced employees who had mistreated the girl were fired, replaced by people chosen for their kindness, not for their subservience to the wealthy. In the months that followed, the rebuilt family flourished in ways that money had never provided. The businessman, transformed by the experience, redirected part of his investments to assistance programs for children living on the streets. His fortune in stocks on Wall Street began to be used not only to accumulate more wealth, but to create opportunities for those who had not been born with a silver spoon in their mouth. The girl, now officially adopted and enrolled in the best schools, developed her special abilities through proper care and unconditional love. Her gift, once a source of fear and misunderstanding, became a blessing that helped the family navigate challenges with anticipated wisdom. The boy, who had almost left forever, grew strong and healthy alongside his special sister. Together, they explored the gardens of the mansion, where she still drew birds in the dirt and he built elaborate castles. But now their games were accompanied by genuine laughter and the security of a family that loved them unconditionally. The businessman, sitting in his office one sunny afternoon 6 months later, watched through the window the 2 children playing in the garden. His financial reports showed that his profits continued to grow. His investments in Bitcoin and other assets yielded consistent dividends. But the true wealth he had found could not be measured in dollars or euros. The nurse's letter, now framed above his desk, reminded him daily that some connections transcend logic and scientific explanations. His life had been saved by a kind woman decades before, and now he had the responsibility to honor that gift by taking care of her granddaughter. The girl, who had spent 2 years surviving on the freezing streets of the city, now had a home where her gift was celebrated, not feared, where her intuitions were heard, not ignored, where she could simply be a child, protected and loved as every child deserves to be. And in the quiet nights, when the mansion rested in peace, she still hummed the songs that her grandmother had taught her. But now the melodies echoed through hallways, full of love, not loneliness. Her story of suffering had transformed into a journey of hope, proving that sometimes happy endings come to those who least expect them, but who most deserve them. The family had found each other not by chance, but by destiny. And together they would build a future where kindness would prevail over greed, where protection would be mutual, and where love would be the true source of all wealth.